Karthikeyan Nachiyappan. He is an architect who has graduated from the Architectural Association. His research has been published in many esteemed journals, such as the Indian Concrete Journal. He is the founder and director of Studio of Architectural Urbanism, an art and architecture consultancy focusing on research and development of housing projects in Ooty and in Chennai. His research interests include low-cost housing, architectural space making, informality and slums, inequalities in planning, and policies and urban design.
Welcome to UGC lecture series on architecture, urban housing, unit number 4, lecture number 3. Today we are going to look at some interesting topics or housing case studies on various spectrum and issues related in housing. So starting from Belapur housing, Yerwada, Tsunami housing and Kanchenjunga, it deals with various strategies explaining what sociability is, what community is, what neighborhood planning is about, and what different forms in housing could do aesthetically. And it also explains about the role, the community, the role of participation, government, public, private, and everything embedded in that concept. To start with Belapur housing, it was designed by Charles Correa. So some quick facts about the project is it was designed in Navi Mumbai, which is right next to the city center, 1 kilometer across, which is located right next to the city center, 1 kilometer across, and it is done for the Bombay's low income profile, and the density which is achieved is extremely high, which is 500 persons per hectare, which would be usually done in a high rise building, but here the typology used was low rise. The most famous word written by Charles Correa according to this project is, making housing is like a bird building its nest. You start with a basic house, but you have to let people change it to their own needs. So this is very apt in this context because Belapur is designed in such a way that people are given the core. So a basic spectrum is being designed and people have been allowed themselves to change according to their particular needs and desires. A simple form explains what Belapur housing is about. So you could see a cluster of 7 different houses encircling a courtyard of 8 meter by 8 meter, and 7 units form a cluster. So the main concept used in the formation of community in Belapur is clustering, and this cluster eventually is repeated thrice to form a bigger cluster, and which is 12 meter by 12 meter. And this whole ensemble of clusters, which had 21 units, are now being multiplied in the form of a site which has a river edge. So now most of the housing forms have been aligned in such a way that this entire community spreads into different scales and hierarchies of open spaces, which leads to the water on either sides of the river. So this relationship with the natural environment of the housing is being established, and the role of community plays a very important role over here. Let us see how this has been achieved. So looking at this image, it gives a clear space of demarcation of how the community space revolves around this entire unit, and in a 3-dimensional axonometric you could see how this community space with this tree is being used. So this central space acts as a thrust for all the 7 houses to come together to interact. So you could see some people, kids, and different levels of sociability could be achieved in these spaces. So this is like something like a jigsaw puzzle which is being intertwined in different ways in different organizations, and a different language or a grammar of architecture has been followed here. And this is an extreme example of explanation or demonstration of a high density housing. So you could just not believe on how 500 people per hectare could be achieved in a low rise. Yes, this is a good example of a low rise high density housing where this density is achieved not sacrificing on the community facilities, so like schools and other spaces. The basic form develops through stages. So here, as the first statement says, build it like a nest and give it to the people to change the rest. So now an initial room which is multi-purpose, which has 2 entrances, 2 side access, and a proper space for window for ventilation has been given, where the plot is accessed through the main entrance and the remaining space is left free for future expansion, and the basic amenities like a water closet and bath is being provided in stage 1. So this is leading to a plot size of 7 meters by 7 meters. Now, the house expands itself according to the needs of provision of a veranda which encircles an entrance for the house, where this becomes the private space. Now, slowly the house develops organically, where the veranda becomes a more sociable space which makes entrance to the room which is accessed inside or maybe through the veranda, and a kitchen where all the services, the plumbing lines are connected in one central space, and the remaining is being left for the private courtyard. So, now you could see how organically every part of the house is being assembled in a way to form a private and a semi-private space and a public realm. So, eventually the house determines itself to have a private room, a multi-purpose room, a veranda, kitchen, water closet and bath, and still not sacrificing on the community or the private courtyard. So, every user has their opportunity to develop this in the way they want, so that the house grows incrementally as well as according to their needs and desires. So, you could also see there is a common sharing wall for the toilet facilities. So, which means that every house is cleverly planned in such a way that the houses are organized without sharing walls, unlike our flats and apartments, and only the service lines and the service utilities like kitchen walls or the bathroom walls have been clustered. One more important factor that is being followed here is about income generation, which is eventual part of any low income project, where involving the community to build houses for themselves. So, when you just teach them on how to build, this generates income for the people. Now, moving on to the next concept called as pluralism. See, this complex is just not built for the low income. This includes several different income groups, so that a sense of pluralism is followed. So, this accommodates or covers the entire social spectrum, including the LIG, MIG and different affordability rate users. And slowly the house plan evolves into 5 different types of places, which ranges from 45 to 70 square meters, and it includes the lowest budget of 20,000 and it accommodates to an upper income of 1,80,000. So, according to the user needs affordability, the size of the unit changes. As you could see, this starts with a single room and a common kitchen space, where this form eventually grows larger in terms of size and square meter area, and this organically develops vertically. So, the house formed from a grounded structure is slowly evolving to form a G+1 structure, still not sacrificing on what the community space is about. The scale of the community spaces vary in different forms, and sometimes it might be bigger and sometimes it might be smaller. The living area and the entire unit of cluster B is being proportioned in a way of 8x by 6x, and this 8 times the x is just a single module which is being proportioned 8 times to form the plot area, and x is the dimension which is left free, and 2x and 4x. So, out of this proportion 6x, the width of the length is being followed as a housing profile. So, width of the plot and length of the housing profile almost matches, so that this entire spectrum or L by B is proportion is to scale, and the way he has clustered includes a common sharing wall which is exactly symmetrical to each other, a wall which has the living facilities combined to each other where the toilet facilities are completely spread, and here a common wall abutting the neighbor, and 2 different toilets having again open spectrums, and here a sharing wall with different units clustered on either sides. Now, moving on to the elevation. So, here the elevation is kept very simple, and you look at the largest, the 70 meter square area plot. You start with a staircase which leads into a private space, and which eventually leads to a kitchen and a backyard, and kitchen and the water closet and bath are thus connected through again a separate scale of a courtyard space, where there is another store that leads to the upper part, where you still have another semi open space or an open terrace which leads into another private space and a small side room with a bath and the closet. So, you could see bath and the closet form a common core, so that it makes it easy for the utilitarian networks or the sewage and all the plumbing lines to fall under single category, and kitchen, side room, room and the private spaces are organized on other side of the open space. So, even though this is a 70 square meter or a 700 square foot typology, you have series of open yards which define the spatial organization for the community to grow eventually. Now, the clustering 7 units, as we said, are combined that eventually lead to group of 8 meter by 8 meter courtyard, and these 3 clusters cluster to form approximately 12 meter by 12 meter courtyard, and the third level or third hierarchy forms together to form a 20 meter by 20 meter courtyard. So, this is otherwise called as hierarchy of different open spaces that have been led in the master plan that is designed by Korea. Now, there is something called a shape grammar or the language of architecture that has been followed by the architect himself. So, assume C to be the courtyard and 7 units that are assumed around it, and taking the positive impacts of how the spatial organization could be has led to different series of permutations. Imagine the courtyard to be on the center, where the northeastern part of it is going to be 1 unit, and what would be the possibility of orientation of the unit is taken in the first part. Assuming the courtyard towards the left of the unit, what would be the possibility of orientation of it? So, the same unit is being repeated in a different way to form this cluster, and this is called the shape grammar, and these houses are structurally simple and can be built by any local mason. So, which means that there is no much technology involved, and local people without any knowledge could be involved, and the scheme caters to a wide range of lowest budgets from 20,000 to 1,80,000, as already mentioned. Now, in shape grammar B, this explains how individual clusters of 7 units and 7 units are combined. So, assuming in shape grammar A we got 7 units, now this is being symmetrically organized to form two groups of 7 units which forms 2 courtyards, or it can be mirrored this way, or it can be mirrored vice versa to form a connected open space. This is separated open space, and another way to connect it would be in a 3 format which has a series of open spaces. So, in shape grammar B, he tries to explain how the different clusters are organized around each other and the spatial format leading to different series of courtyards. Now, moving to the next example, which is almost similar but in a different context, where this explains the concept of incrementality in a different way. So, Yerwada housing, which is designed by Elemental and Pune, and here you could note the site location is right close to the city, not very far away, but 6 kilometers from the city center, and the typology followed here is low rise incremental, and it is a participatory approach unlike the Belapur housing. And here the density achieved is 1200 units in total, and approximately according to the slum clearance board over there, 269 square foot is being followed as a common thumb rule for every unit, and it is a slum rehabilitation program. So, developed in Bombay, this incremental housing strategy is intended to grow organically, which means that without removing the existing community or without uprooting the community, the slum grows eventually one on the other. And this model can exist with any similar urban conditions, which means that this cannot be replicated elsewhere, but this can be followed in a pattern where the urban conditions or the context remains the same in any part of the country. And as the architect of this, Prasanna Desai, said, what we did was to involve the beneficiaries in the process. So, this involving the beneficiaries leads to participatory action. So, participation is very important in these, and this will be explained through in these lectures. And 2 different housing typologies were designed, and possibilities of grouping to share walls or have individual homes or mixing the options to fit the individual demands are adapted to the most arrangements. So, now when something is participatory, individual demands come into existence. So, when these two together, this caters the needs of the individual user. This strategy is to create these informal slums into urban districts which are permanent through the process of gradual upgradation. So, any slum upgradation or rehabilitation project cannot happen just in one stop or one go. So, it has to take a time, and gradually it improves over the course of time. Now, looking at the center, it is surrounded by different, and it is very close to the airport. So, which means that there is possibility of city growing towards this, and eventually this could be encircled in a way that every access to social and other facilities could be through the site. Now, talking about the project and how it has evolved. So, it started with the central government scheme. So, this is more or less like a top down model. So, it is started from the central government through the BUSP, the Basic Services for Urban Poor, and under JNNURM. So, Jawaharlal Nehru Urban Renewal Mission was one scheme that has been started with, and it is being carried out with Mahila Milan, that is a Women Empowerment Society, and NSDF, National Slum Dwellers Federation, SPARK. So, you could imagine what scale of project would be this, involving central government authorities, state government authorities, and different agencies or local bodies and national organizations involved in developing or upgrading to give a facelift to the slum, and Prasanna Desai were the local architects involved. So, this started from around 2008 and it is still organically evolving. So, in this kind of project we couldn't say that the timeline of the project started from 2008 and ended here. So, it is a continuous process. It is still happening on site. So, addressing the media, Mr. Prasanna Desai said, so for this we conducted workshops and activities that allowed the families to play with maps and models. So, this clearly intends every community or every person in a community has been evolved in the design process. So, architects along with local organizations and the community all together play a very important role in building of these houses and communities. Now, there are different set of plans which are unlike Belapur, where you say 5 different typologies have been replicated in different parts. This is an in situ upgradation, which means existing plots. This is an already existing plan where specific set of buildings, these specific set of buildings are taken into consideration and typologies have been derived. So, there are basically 2 different typologies and on an incremental basis. So, here unlike Belapur, where there is an horizontal expansion of communities, in Yerwada there is a vertical expansion. So, incrementality is the same concept which is being followed here, but rather growing horizontally, this grows 1 or 2 floors above, and just the model of the house is being replicated, and you could see how gradually the house grows according to the different user demand and needs, but keeping a central point that this does not exceed the 269 square foot that is being indicated by the government slum clearance scheme. So, whatsoever the philosophy of housing or whatsoever the design that caters these low income profile people, there is a standard that is already set by the government which should be considered, and most of these according to the slum housing, efficiency, economy and energy are 3 major points which has to be considered, where efficiency leads to proper utilization of resources and efficiency of the labor involved. Economy is generating micro economy or teaching them how to build so that they could later upgrade their lifestyles through these different economic process. And energy, how much less footprint you use, how much energy efficiently you build, and how sustainable you are in terms of social and in terms of economical as well as physical sustainability. And these are some of the drawings and maps that have been generated by the Mahila Milan architects and the organization, where the existing hierarchy of open spaces have been routed at different levels, and the road characters, the primary, secondary, tertiary, all these roads along with plots have been studied and mapped out, and this eventually goes to a land use map showing what all communities, or say addressing these typologies on how these individual units could be modified, and on a phasing manner these have been individually retrofitted by the user himself. And plan indicates 7 different or 7 groups of slums in Yerwada. So, the configuration of a series of slums in Yerwada area has been taken into consideration, and slow gradual developments of temporary and permanent places have been designed. So, this is an organically growing community, not having a set standard of development other than having a standard square feet area, and this involves community, and this has been successful in terms of upgrading user lives. Moving on to the next example of tsunami housing, which is in Tamil Nadu, Nagapattinam district, and this was sponsored by Swiss Solidarity and Swiss Red Cross, and this is close to Sirgali, Nagapattinam and Taragampadi districts. So, there were totally 1000 units that were being developed, and again the typology which is adopted over here is low rise cluster typology. Here this so as everyone know, after December 26, 2004 the tsunami, entire coastal stretch has been vast hit, and this tsunami created a devastated environment in coastal areas. Addressing this, there was a low-rise community proposal where this was a holistic approach which benefited the disadvantaged people and minorities. So, unlike the other example where we were talking about low income profile in general, here this project more or less addresses every part of spectrum of a low income user group, taking into special consideration of the minorities and disadvantaged people. And out of the 1000 houses that were built, 250 were in the same site, that was an in situ development, and 750 were moved out of the site, and relocation was done in the area provided by the government itself. The roadmap to this was started with analysis of damage. So, first the group of people identified what kind of damages had happened, and slowly they moved on to study what kind of spaces do the coastal community people require. And after the spaces, the habitat mapping was done, the socio-economic survey was taken up, and from socio-economic survey, awareness was done in to the villages on how to develop these communities and what could be the construction process. Then construction of 7 model houses were done, and eventually that developed into formation of cluster communities, because once the construction is done, there needs to be a group of people or a cluster committee that has to be assigned to maintain all these houses, and training of engineers were done, and finally building of communities happened. These communities and the construction method were very conventional and used it appropriately of RCC kind of construction, and a simple framework was done. And these communities thrive with a low rise typology, and the cluster approach was very simple. So, the project was divided into clusters of 25 to 50 houses. Each cluster was assigned 5 house owners to take care of the community or the cluster along with a cluster supervisor, and this cluster officers were in turn associated with engineers and architects who would train them. Now, these people who eventually were targeted for the entire community are taking decisions at micro level. So, which means that larger contractors can be avoided in a housing process. Always when larger contractors are evolved, the profit making becomes the motive. So, when profit making is the motive, low income might not survive. So, the ultimate decision taken by the government was to take decisions at micro level, and that involves the community people and the supervision officers. Now, there are 7 different typologies, which includes a living, bedroom, kitchen and a water closet, bath, a puja room, staircase, veranda and wash place were added according to different users. So, this also addresses a spectrum of social strata. So, this does not cater only to a family size of 2 numbers or 3 numbers, but it caters to a wider variety. So, as the typologies move on, you could see there is a growth in the spatial typology in increasing the square meters and also growing in terms of floors. So, the floors might not exceed G+1, and this is a mass housing and it is a customized product. So, which means that every house that were built almost resemble in typology except for the color differences according to user needs, but this has been stamped and sealed throughout the ground, which has been done. And the cost of the house, that was around 3 lakhs, was a little bit affordable, and the financing of this were made it much easier for the people to access it. Now, the entire key decisions taken was to avoid contractors and involve house owners, clusters, volunteers and engineers. So, at this smaller scale, they were able to control all these non-profit making issues, so that the housing typology could be a bit successful, and the quality of construction was achieved, and it was tested, and essence was extended when they improved their houses to prove their upgradation in lives. Ultimately, the involvement of people of the communities made the entire project a holistic one and also a successful one. So, though the space for stakeholders were provided, and it also resolved several conflicts and demands involving the community, made it a process of success, and this community wanted immediate resolution of these conflicts to be done at those stages itself, and this eventually did not compromise on the quality of construction. Moving on to the last example, Kanchenjunga Apartments, which is much diverse from all the 3 we were looking before. Kanchenjunga addresses form, it addresses aesthetics, it addresses vertical zoning of different spaces, and it addresses different climatic aspects on how architecture could be addressed with respect to climate. So, again the architect was Charles Correa. It was in Mumbai, right in the center of the city, heart of the city with vicinity to the coast. It was targeted for not low income, but a profile of middle and high income, and it was 27 floors. It was built between 1970 to 74. One could achieve this target of feet 20 or 3 decades before on creating a high rise which is 27 floors. So, the concept is very simple, orient it east west so that it catches the sea breeze and monsoons could pass through. Second is to maximize these veranda spaces. So, the concept is being achieved or taken from the olden bungalows where there are deep filters. So, there were two lines of there were two lines of defense, and these veranda protects from different screening of air pollution and from the interlock of 4 different apartment typologies. So, basically 4 different units were taken, and clustering of these 4 in different dimensions and different scales and different vertical zoning gave resultant of this entire high rise marvel. So, there were, as we said, there are 4 typologies A, B, C and D, which is being stacked horizontally, and these smaller displacement in levels, where you could see these smaller displacement of levels was ready to differentiate between the external earth filled terrace and the internal living room difference. So, these levels were critical because this only addressed what was an outdoor space and what is an indoor space, and these scale differences have been got by interlocking different units in section, and these were addressed using deep garden verandas suspended in the air. As you could see, all these yellow are verandas, and that relates to catching of monsoon winds and the concept of verandas. There were 4 different typologies, and this sits right in the city center, where the location is in the heart of the city, where the form corresponds to other different neighbors which are again high rises now. And when this was built, this was one tower which was standing, and the road access, as mentioned, is from the main road, and the site is being accessed at different levels, where yellow becomes the main structure which has a central lobby which is accessed through it, and the lift core is over here, and the green which is over here leads to the parking at a lower level, and the outer part from access from the road is being a landscape space. So, the main access is through the central lobby that takes you into the tower, and as the elevation shows, it is parametrically, or it is kind of exhibiting again a shape grammar, and different punctures at different levels gives you an aesthetically appealing visual quality of this entire facade, and the facade is very simply planned with punctures here and there that creates these veranda spaces at a smaller and a larger scale, and these displacement of verandas keeps it non-monotonous, so that the entire form on different elevations are much more ambiguous. And the vertical zoning, as we were talking about, is parking is related to the basement with the central lobby that connects to different floors of 27 levels, and these internal sections and the internal slabs casted creates the difference in the living environment which is internally placed, and you have a surface parking of 20 cars and the basement parking of 30 cars to be accommodated, and a clubhouse, pool, entrance, and 4 different typical apartments. And to be noted, elevators stop at alternate floors. So, now the modularity is being explored in 4 different kinds of models, starting from a 3 to a 5 bed apartment ranging from 294 to 373 meter square, and a special penthouse is being provided on the top. So, just exploring one model of it, this explains of how internal organization leads to deeper verandas. So, in the 3-dimensional form is visualized this deeper veranda which is double floor high, which is exhibited in the corner, as you could see over here. So, there are 2 scales of veranda, one in the right and one in the left, to maximize the wind which is being according to the orientation, and from the lift core over here it enters through the main. So, a closer look of it exhibits that through the entrance in the ground floor you have a living, and you have a staircase close by which leads to the upper floor, and through the slab enters the bedroom in the ground floor and a small study which has attached bathrooms and a small balcony on the right side, and this exhibits a terrace garden on the left which is accessed through the living room, which moves to a dining, and there is a separate entrance from the corridor that is being given to the kitchen and the utility area. So, this clever spatial organization deals with separating the service entry and the utilities on one side, and the private spaces that are being clustered around the organization of verandas and balconies on the other side. So, just to move on, this explains what kind of breeze movement is within the internal section, as you already see in the section of the entire building. So, the structure is followed from a slip form technology which was first used in India, where the concrete is been poured where the shutter moves or slips once the concrete gets sets, and that is being adjusted with the quality of concrete to set early. So, these sketches explain the visual quality of the interior spaces and two different levels, how one and double height spaces work together. Balconies and verandas work at different scales, creating different punctures and different levels, and the colors added to it also gives a visually pleasing environment. And finally, Kanchenjunga sits in the center of the city, which makes it a landmark and a qualitable space to live. So, just to summarize on what we were looking. So, we were looking at what user oriented design is, different types of housing modules, incremental strategy, community participation, spatial planning and climate responsive housing case studies. So, this spectrum of housing case studies explain on different qualities or process of housing that could be encompassed. And just few questions to explain would include how planning and layout works on different case studies, and the concept of shape grammar, how it was achieved, and different strategies of planning of low income houses could also be explored. So, let us see some of the housing process which are linked in the next chapter and the next series of lecture. Thank you.